Support Name Explain on Patreon for ad-free videos, exclusive podcasts and blog posts, and to help choose what names get explained. Click the link in the description. Is there anything truly more human than the construction of roads? No other creature on our planet has made roads quite like we have. They allow us to move ourselves and goods far more easily, and most importantly, they connect us humans together. Roads are undoubtedly one of the greatest inventions ever, and they go back a long time too. The oldest known road to us is located in Egypt and is thought to be over 4,500 years old. The Giza road these days, however, is little more than a line of stones in the sand. Over these thousands of years, roads have changed dramatically. The settlements we now call home have all different kinds of roads, and all these different kinds of roads have different names. And yes, I know roads have names like Baker and Bourbon, but it's not these kinds of roads we're looking into today. Though we have looked at them in the past, so go check out that video too. Today we're focusing on the different names for different types of roads, the word you tend to see in the latter part of a road sign. I'm sure you've heard roads be called all sorts of things like avenues or boulevards, but what exactly is the difference between these things? What criteria does a road have to meet to be called an avenue? And likewise, what features does a road have to be called a boulevard? So today, let's find out what exactly these names mean, and of course, find out where these names came from in the first place. While I've been using the word road as something of a catch-all term, another name may be more appropriate, that being street. A lot of the types of roads I'm going to be covering today may be more appropriately be called streets. The first thing we need to ask ourselves is what exactly is the difference between a road and a street? This seems to be a question that doesn't have the most clear of answers. Two answers I found said kind of different but similar things. One said that road is a name for anything that connects 2 points, while street is the name for a kind of road that has buildings on the side of it. Another answer I found said streets serve a public function, such as residential or commercial buildings being there, while a road is purely for transport. I kind of see the logic in both these answers, but there's also holes in these answers too. I know of many streets that have houses on either side of them but are labelled as roads. It seems to be a bit of a pick and choose thing. I'm sure we all have an idea of what constitutes a road and what constitutes a street in our mind, which are all pretty similar but somewhat different. As for where these words come from though, road is the older of them it seems, believed to ultimately come from the Proto-Indo-European rai, meaning ride. Street comes from Latin however, and their word of strata, meaning paved road. While I'm using the word road as a catch-all term for these types of constructions that allow people to travel more easily, that isn't quite correct. The generic name for all passageways and transit routes seems to be thoroughfare. This name not only includes the likes of roads and streets, but also things like bridleways for horses and footpaths for people. Thoroughfare is an interesting word. At face value, it's just the words of thorough and fair put together. Though if we look into these words, things get a little more interesting. Fair simply comes from Old English and means road/passage. So you may think it would make more sense if these were called thoroughfares, as they are roads you go through. Once upon a time, however, thorough and through meant the same thing. Thorough now means looking at something extensively. It and through, however, initially meant end to end. So you can kind of see how these two words are somewhat similar. To be thorough means to examine something end to end. To go through something means to go from end to end. Despite the interestingness of this word, however, I'm going to be sticking with the word road as a blanket term for all these things, simply because it's the more popular and well-known word. Where do avenues fit into all of this, however? Well, it seems that the defining feature of an avenue is the fact that they are lined with trees. Basically, if it has a tree, it is most likely an avenue. Other features are often attributed to avenues too, like them being rather wide and often rather busy. Most cities have famous avenues, and they even tend to be the more popular streets, often lined with shops and restaurants. Avenue comes from French and means things like a way of access, ultimately deriving from the Latin advenire, meaning to reach or to arrive. Avenues are also seen as running north to south, with streets running east to west, though that might just be a New York thing. What's interesting about this word, however, is the fact we use it in a more metaphorical sense too. We use avenues to navigate in our real world, but we also use avenues in a more abstract sense too. We say things like, if that doesn't go to plan, we'll find a different avenue. This gives the word a much broader meaning than the name of other types of road. In fact, the word avenue can be more defined broadly as a way of approaching anything, as opposed to just being a type of road. You definitely don't hear too many people using boulevard in this more metaphorical sense. Speaking of boulevards, let's look into those next, shall we? Boulevards seem to be somewhat similar to avenues, some even consider them one and the same, though it seems that boulevard is a title for a kind of road that is even more grand than an avenue. Boulevards are seen as being much wider, and instead of having trees on just one side, have trees and vegetation in general on both sides of them. They're very fancy roads, that's for sure. The name boulevard actually comes from military roots. It came from the Middle Dutch boulevard, meaning wall of a fortification. These walls often had flat tops that could be walked down like a road. So when the French got their hands on the word, they changed it to boulevard and used it specifically for these top parts of the fort walls you could walk across. Over time, this word got applied to non-fort wall roads too, it would seem. While boulevards are grand and impressive, usually in bustling cities, lanes aren't quite as impressive. In fact, one source described lanes as the complete opposite of boulevards. Roads with the title lane tend to be smaller and far less busy. Sometimes they only accommodate walkers or small amounts of vehicle traffic. And while lanes do exist in cities, they are more closely associated with smaller settlements like villages and the countryside in general. Lane is unsurprisingly a pretty old word. We know it was used as far back as the 15th century to define any track. The furthest back we can trace the word is with the Dutch laan. Another road name that is somewhat ambiguous like lane is way. This too comes from murky origins, but I read that a way is defined as any road that is an offshoot or side road to a main road. While roads can be simply titled as ways, what's interesting about it is how other words have been attached to it to create other road names such as motorway or highway or parkway or even Broadway. These other kinds of ways are pretty easy to understand too. A parkway is a road with more greenery and a motorway is a road more dedicated to motor vehicles. Another kind of way is an alleyway. The reason I didn't mention them there is because they can also be known as just alleys. Alleys are quite possibly the smallest kind of road, at least the smallest kind of road we'll be talking about today. An alley is a kind of thoroughfare which is created thanks to the small amount of space between two buildings. It's rare you'll be able to fit more than a few people down one, let alone cars. Alleys also get a bit of a bad rap for being hotbeds for crime. While that can be the case, they can be rather pleasant too, or at least a good shortcut. One idea as to where the name alley comes from has it relating to the Latin word of ambulare, meaning to walk. This makes all the sense in the world as alleys are most predominantly walked down as opposed to driven down. I imagine this is also where we get the term of amble from too. I'm just going to check that actually. One moment, just googling it now. From the ancient noun of amble, which is from the Latin. Ambler, yes it is. Cool, let's carry on. Another kind of street that is mainly walked down is an arcade. The defining feature of an arcade is the fact that they are covered with a roof of some sort. Originally these arcade roofs were made up of arches, and they were named after these arches too, coming from the Latin arcus, meaning arches. What's most interesting however is how this road's name is now more linked to a type of building than a type of road, specifically a building full of video games. There is a link between these two types of arcades. As the road kind of arcades are made normally for walking down, it meant that as well as having shops, they had amusements and activities to partake in too. Things like coconut shies and catching rubber ducks. These became known as arcade games. As time went on, these arcade games started to become electronic and swapped coconuts for Pac-Man and rubber ducks for Space Invaders. These kinds of arcade games became so popular that they had entire buildings dedicated to them, which too became known as arcades. A bit off topic I know, but neat nonetheless. Back to road names however, and we have terrace. Terrace is a word that has garnered a few different meanings it would seem. It seems its oldest meaning is that of a balcony, or an outside area in general coming off of a building. This comes from the Old French terrace meaning platform, which has ties to the Latin word for land in general, terra. Terrace as in a road relates to the geography of the land, and relates more to its Latin roots. Traditionally a terrace is a road at the top of a natural slope, hence why terrace houses are often on sloping roads. I read though that many roads just call themselves a terrace anyway. From slopes to seasides however, as we have esplanades next. This is another type of road primarily made for walking. However, it seems that the defining feature of an esplanade is the fact that it is by a large body of water, whether that be a lake, river or the sea. The name for these roads comes from the Latin explanare, meaning to make level/flat. I guess these nice walkways by water had to be flattened out first. Promenades are often thought to be the same thing as esplanades, and while promenades are often tied with being by the water, any road made for leisurely walking can be called a promenade. The two words come from completely different roots too. Somehow the name promenade comes from the Latin promenere, meaning to drive animals forward, coming from their elements of pro meaning go forth and menere meaning to shout at animals. This latter part comes from the Latin minali meaning to threaten, and it's where we get the word of menace from too. There's nothing at all menacing about modern promenades, however, despite their etymology. And let's end things with the kind of road that comes to an end. Most roads lead to somewhere, but that isn't the case with these guys. They seem to have all kinds of names, from the blunt name of dead end to other terms like close and court, though I imagine their most popular name is cul-de-sac. Cul-de-sacs are sometimes considered different things to other dead end roads. Most noticeably, they have a circular end, which makes it easier for cars to turn around in. This is unsurprisingly a French word. It translates into meaning bottom of a sack. This makes all the sense in the world, as the cul-de-sac does come to a close, much like the bottom of a sack. Hopefully now you should have a better understanding as to what differentiates an avenue from a boulevard, why a terrace should really be on a slope, or even how a roofed road lent its name to video games. Next time you see one of these names out in the wild, why not check to see if that road is really living up to its name. Thank you to all my patrons who support Name Explain on a monthly basis. Patreon is vital to Name Explain, and donating just $2 a month allows you to enjoy ad-free videos and bonus Patreon exclusive content. It also allows you to help choose what names get explained in upcoming videos, and gets your name here with all these awesome people. Thank you so much for all the support you guys give Name Explain. Country roads take me home to the place I belong. Sorry, got a bit carried away there.